Good morning. I was languishing here in the Horse Guards Hotel having a cup of tea, and I suddenly realised I was here last week, and I suddenly realised I'm sitting in front of a painting done by a friend called Liam O'Farrell, and it's a lovely painting, and he has a very distinctive style. So it's such a pleasure to be able to celebrate that at the same time. I wanted to get onto the subject of Trump and Netanyahu and the sort of architecture of escalation and how bluster and brinkmanship are threatening global stability, frankly, this dangerous gambit. And ceasefires by their very nature are fragile, but I think it's the duty, it's the responsibility of world leaders to support them wherever possible. And the activities of Trump and Netanyahu are scurrilous. Ceasefires require patience, trust, and an understanding that neither side will get everything they want in the short term. Yet, when figures like Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu enter the fray, the art of diplomacy seems to give way to the politics of provocation and brinkmanship and posturing. And now, but both men have issued ultimata. If Hamas doesn't release all the hostages by Saturday noon, Israel will resume what Netanyahu calls intense fighting in Gaza. Trump, never one to be outdone, has not only echoed Netanyahu's threat, but has gone a step further, proposing to own Gaza under US authority, a declaration so detached from reality that it would be laughable if the stakes weren't so high. Far from being mere rhetoric, these threats have material consequences. They undermine diplomacy. The ceasefire, fragile though it is, has already enabled the exchange of hostages and prisoners, and each phase builds upon the last, meaning that any collapse now would not just halt progress, it will make future negotiations even more difficult. And Trump and Netanyahu's hardline stance risks making negotiation impossible, as Hamas has already signalled that threats will only complicate matters. And Trump's musing about turning Gaza into a Riviera, I think was escalating problems before they even were identified. Gaza's death toll stands at over 48,000, with tens of thousands more wounded, and the destruction is almost total. Any resumption of war would exacerbate an already apocalyptic situation, and Israel's own standing in international law is precarious, with genocide charges at the International Court of Justice and arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. And the United Nations and multiple humanitarian organizations have already described the conditions in Gaza as unlivable. If all hell breaks out, as Trump so theatrically put it, the enclave will be beyond salvation. If Trump's threats to take Gaza under US authority sound like a bizarre real estate pitch, that's because they are. He speaks of cherishing Gaza, of building hotels and office buildings, of turning it into the Riviera of the Middle East. But how exactly does he propose to achieve this? Does he plan to send US troops to enforce his vision? Does he expect Egypt and Jordan to donate land to absorb millions of displaced Palestinians? Does he intend to govern a population that neither asked for nor wants US control? The last time the US occupied a war-torn region with promises of rebuilding and prosperity, it was Iraq, and we know how that ended. And the suggestion that Gaza, after all it has endured, could simply be remade according to Trump's whims is not just offensive, it's delusional. If Israel resumes full-scale war, and if Trump's reckless rhetoric escalates the situation further, the consequences will be severe. It will lead to regional instability. The threat of a wider war is very real. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, and even Iran itself could be drawn into a larger conflict. Jordan and Egypt, key US allies, have made it clear that forced Palestinian displacement is a red line. And if Trump pressures them too hard, it could strain relations in ways that will have long-term consequences for US influence in the Middle East. And with the ICC already moving against Israeli leadership, further escalation could result in additional charges, making Israel an even greater international pariah. The US, by aligning itself so closely with Israel's actions, could find itself facing increasing diplomatic isolation, and history has shown that prolonged wars in the Middle East, particularly those involving large-scale civilian casualties, serve as a recruitment tool for extremism. If Hamas is weakened but not destroyed, what rises in its place may be even more radical. The war on terror has demonstrated that military solutions often create more problems than they solve. And both Netanyahu and Trump, frankly, are playing with fire. The ceasefire, however fragile, remains the best path forward, not because it's perfect, but because the alternative is catastrophe. If Netanyahu truly wants the hostages back, if Trump genuinely wants peace, then they must recognize that threats and ultimata are not ways to bring stability. Negotiation, compromise, humanitarian considerations must take precedence over machismo and political posturing. The world is watching. If these two leaders choose escalation, history will not be kind to them.